Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Library Access, a podcast brought to you by thekeyforge.com. Like always, my name is Nick, and I'm here with Alex and Steven. If you'd like to show your support for what we do or throw money at our faces, go ahead and head over to patreon.com/thekeyforge. Anything helps. I wanted to start off this week with a topic that I'm particularly interested in, so sorry for my bias showing. Have either of you guys played on Tabletop Simulator yet?
I've tried it out once. I honestly prefer Crucible, but it's solid. It's a good way to play, especially if you don't have a lot of people around or you're looking to get in a quick game with a couple friends. I personally feel Crucible is a stronger platform for online play, but Tabletop Simulator is definitely a close second.
What about you, Alex?
I have not. Now, Steven, if you've tried it out. Nick, have you tried it yet, personally?
I have. So I played it twice, and I feel like this kind of screwed it up, for me personally when I first tried it. I tried it with somebody that didn't know how to play Keyforge at all. Like, we'd been playing Tabletop Simulator that night. I was like, hey, you want to try this out? And he was super willing, and he did well at it. He picked the game up really fast, but it was like I was new to Tabletop Simulator itself, and then he was new to Keyforge, so it was kind of slow, kind of messy. And then the other night, I picked it back up. I found someone on Discord that wanted to play on there. And he was this Tabletop Simulator guru who had played for, who knows, years and years on Tabletop Simulator, playing everything, everything that people play on there, I guess. So he knew all the hotkeys, and he knew how to do this and that and the tricks. And it was really interesting to kind of hear him explain stuff about things that, like, don't really matter, I guess, like, unlimited bags of items and how you have to reduce a count down to 1 before you put it back in the bag or it won't accept it. Like, weird stuff like that. It was just interesting to kind of pick his brain. But I have a real, like, I'm split right down the middle, a real love-hate thing with Tabletop Simulator. I think I enjoy it more than the Crucible if I have the time for it. It's so much more fun. Like, it really scratches your in-person itch, kind of, just having like the kind of 3D cards that you throw down and your damage counters and your amber and all that. Like, you're in control of every aspect of the game. Whereas in the Crucible, like, you're so not in control that, like, your opponent's turn just scrolls by you immediately. And if you're not paying super close attention, you might lose track of what they do entirely. But the other side of that's kind of a double-edged sword is that on Tabletop Simulator, it takes so freaking long. Like, Crucible games, you're 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and your game's done. I think we played for an hour and 3 minutes on one game. Granted, there was discussion happening, and he was explaining mechanics of the program to me at the time. But I walked away just like exhausted. I was like, oh my gosh, that was like 3 times as long as it needed to be. But that's not a fair read. That's with one guy. It's all I played with my buddy the first time, and then a Keyforge guy the second time. So, if I were to really get into it and play with other people who have really gotten into it, the games might only take 20 minutes there. But I really enjoyed, the potential of it all. And I'm constantly looking for other ways to play. And I say that like there's a lot of options. There's not. You can play in person on Crucible or on Tabletop Simulator, short of playing on like Skype or Discord video or something like that, which doesn't sound super great.
It doesn't work very well. I've tried playing a Skype game. It's fine. It is as close to playing in person as you can get. But trying to move your camera and stuff around, it's not. There are definitely better ways to play.
Right.
Let me ask you a quick question, just for my edification, because I haven't tried Tabletop Simulator. Would you say that it's comparable to playing on the Crucible with manual mode turned on? Like, is that the same kind of idea for gameplay, or is there some automation?
So the Tabletop Simulator itself is just a total sandbox game where you can do anything, nothing happens on its own. There's a lot of super smart people out there who have made like scripted games. A good example that I can think of off the top of my head is Settlers of Catan. That's where we play Catan, and it's set up to be totally scripted, which is way better than playing in person, I feel like, because I don't know, in person I just miss things. And for people who aren't familiar with Catan, you'll probably be lost, and I won't waste your time explaining it, but you roll a dice and you get a 6. for, every single person that, sits on a 6 there, they automatically get their cards handed out to them because some genius scripted that whole thing to happen that way. So the game's mostly automated, but you're still, throwing your cards out and moving them around. And it's, that's still kind of like sandbox environment. Keyforge, it says, the mod says it's scripted, but I'm not exactly sure in what way, aside from like there's a handy way you can import your deck or you can get a randomly generated deck. So I assume that's a scripted bit they're talking about. But like card interactions aren't really a thing. You can pick your house. Your house is designated at the bottom of your identity card area. You can click those and it say your opponent chooses, dis, whatever. But interactions, if you do attacks or things like that, they don't happen on their own, which is another downside, depending on how you look at it, I guess, to Tabletop Simulator, is that you can't really talk without voice, which is not a downside for me because I prefer to be on voice, even on Crucible. I play on Crucible all the time without it, but it's much more enjoyable to, to talk out your turn like you would in person, and they do the same thing. And I feel like playing on the Crucible and playing in person are really different. And for me, it fluctuates pretty wildly. Playing on Crucible, I'll either pay way more attention to my turn and I'll play really well, or that same kind of, non-distraction environment will allow me to be distracted by something else, whether I'm listening to music or texting or something, and then I'm playing really poorly. And I can usually identify it when it happens, but by the time I see it, it's too late. So playing on voice, I feel like it keeps you a little more accountable, but it also, if you're into like the kind of weird psychological mind game, whatever that comes with playing card games in person, which I'm just kind of discovering for the first time, you can really kind of distract your opponent. I had that as like a topic idea. It didn't seem worth it to like really dive into. That's all I had to say about TTS. But is that something you guys consider in your gameplay? And not to make me sound like a sociopath or anything, I'm not. But more and more, like like I've said a million times, like this is my first in-person card game I've played as an adult. I played online ones as an adult, like Hearthstone, and I've tried the Elder Scrolls one and stuff like that. But like Keyforge is the first one I've really played with strangers in strange environments like that. And I'm like more and more. I went to a tournament over the weekend. Might have already talked about it. I went to a tournament and like it just kind of like dawned on me that like there's few rules governing how all of this works. If you were, it's a game where you have to talk, I guess, to explain your moves and things like that. You don't get that in chess or checkers or whatever. So I would imagine if you're like a chess tournament, etiquette is just like be quiet. But there's no real rules dictating that. So I found myself like, kind of, I said I'm not a sociopath, but kind of embracing that inner sociopath and like, making a point to kind of like start conversation about cards they played or, stuff like that, just to try to throw them off. And I was curious, is that a thing that people do? And if so, is it frowned upon? Like, am I a jerk for doing that or trying it?
I mean, it depends on how you want to read it, right? Like, I'm aggressively friendly when I play in person because I try and set that tone for the game because I don't want anybody to walk away from playing against me and feel like whether they won or lost, like it was a bad experience. That just might be like my own baggage that I bring to the table, so to speak. But like, I do the same thing you do, but it's not coming from a place of wanting to throw people off. Like, I just want to have a conversation about cards. If I've never seen the card before, or if it's a cool card, or if they're using it in a cool way I haven't seen before, I totally want to have those conversations. It's only now occurring to me, talking to you, Nick, that somebody might perceive me doing that as, trying to play, mind games with them. So now I'm actually going to have to reconsider slightly exactly how friendly and conversational I want to be and modulate that, I guess, depending on the person that I'm playing against. I expect that at like higher levels of play, that sort of thing might be slightly discouraged, if only out of general etiquette. Steven, you've been like a long time card player with various games. What's your perspective?
My perspective is that it really depends on the game. Right now, Keyforge, all tournaments have to be done at the relaxed tier. So having that hyper-friendly attitude, like I also have that same hyper-friendly attitude at these tournaments. I don't mind if people take moves back. I don't mind that, if they need to check my cards or read my cards. I mean, basically, just don't bridge shuffle my cards, and I'm happy. You can do whatever you need to my deck, But then I think it's going to be a thing definitely at the higher levels where you sit down. At the higher levels, people are expected to have a general knowledge of all the cards, and like maybe one or two like misreads or stuff like that to look at a card is fine. But play definitely will go faster at higher level tournaments. But for the most part, yeah, it's a weird mindset because the higher in the tournament structure you go, the more quiet I've noticed tournaments become. And I'm not sure if that's just because of the games that I used to play in tournaments. Netrunner is a game where you have to be talking to your opponent the entire time. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, and I won't get into too many details because this is a Keyforge podcast, not a Netrunner podcast. But the idea of Netrunner is that you're playing two asymmetrical decks. You have a Cyberpunk runner who is trying to get into the other opponent's corporation deck, and you access cards from their deck. So there's a lot of that going on in that game where you touch a card because you need to flip it over, or your opponent needs to see something to depend on if they're going to activate their countermeasures, or you're pulling cards out of their hand. And that kind of a thing in etiquette is completely okay. But that also led to a lot more mind games. And that game was specifically designed for mind games. You wanted to trick your opponent. You didn't want your opponent to run your hand when you had all the points in your hand for them just to take from you. So my experience is a little bit more swayed in that direction, where I'm used to the friendly banter, and then when go time hits and it's serious, it becomes a little less friendly banter and more of I need this card, I'm taking the third card from the left, that kind of a thing. So I definitely see where the mind game aspect comes from into card games. Right now at Keyforge, I don't think there's so much of a mind game aspect. You definitely can. Like, you can definitely bluff in this game. Like, if you have shadows on your house card, you bluff and you say that you have bait and switch all the time because it's a common card. It's a powerful card that a lot of people feel has a high impact on the game, and you are able to bluff it and just hold out your hand and be like, do you want to sit at that much amber? Do you think I have bait and switch right now? And some formats you're not allowed to even look at the deck list. Like, I went to a sealed tournament this last yesterday, and I played against a couple shadow decks, and I will happily say that I misplayed against them because I saw on their identity card, hey, there's shadows. I need to play around this card because I can't look at their deck list. I need to play around the fact that they probably have a common card. And bait and switch didn't get played on me the entire tournament. So, I mean, it definitely has a mind game aspect when you can't see their deck, and it has a definitely different mind game aspect when you can see their deck and have to start counting the cards and counting the odds of what they specifically have in there. So I definitely feel that mind games is a part of this game. I don't think we're at the point yet where we need to start figuring mind games as part of a general strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll clarify. I'm super overly nice to people also. I like that's just how I am. Like in every walk of life, I try so hard to like be conscious of how other people are feeling and like try to put people at ease. Customer service especially. Like I'm so overly friendly and nice, and it carries into the game for sure. If I beat somebody, I try like my absolute hardest to like compliment and be like, wow, that was really close. That was awesome. This when you did this, that was crazy. Stuff like that. Um, and I'll realize that like I don't do it malicious like 99% of the time. There have been a couple times where I'm like it was like toward the end of the tournament I really wanted the win, so I was a little tactful there. But what'll usually happen is I'll realize like I'll be talking about like I'll end my turn, they'll start doing something and I'll start talking about something they did or they're doing or whatever. And I'll realize like, oh, this is distracting, it's kind of rude. And then I'll realize like, oh, that's okay. Like, maybe I should just kind of lean into this, and I don't stop myself, and I usually kind of double down. not always. Like I'm not just constantly a jerk, but I've thought about like it kind of dawned on me that like there's nothing dictating that you have to be quiet. Like you don't have to not talk. Like that's
Yeah, this game is not chess. No card game will ever be chess. You'll always be able to talk to your opponent, and that's for good and for bad. If you want to make it good and have a friendly conversation, 10 out of 10. If you want to make it bad and start playing mind games, well, that's a prerogative. But it is not inherently good or bad. It's just a thing that these games are designed for a more social aspect.
Definitely, definitely. I think an interesting point just came up, which is around the existence of cards like bait and switch that we've all seen now because it's common. It's it's porridge. It's everywhere. And one thing that I had not really thought about until just this moment was the idea that the designers of the game made some of the swingingest cards that are available just super common. So, Gateway to Dis, Bait and Switch, Coward's End, etc. All these things that can have like enormous one card changes in the game are super common, which makes the bluffing aspect of the game a real part of gameplay. Like I've known up till this point that if I'm playing against a Shadows deck rather, I have to be very, very conscious of how much amber I am stockpiling because I'm asking to have it taken away from me with a bait and switch. But at the same time, it never occurred to me there's a possibility for somebody to actually give me the impression that they have a bait and switch, whether or not they actually have one. And that's super interesting to think about.
Yeah. I kind of do the opposite. I meant to mention this earlier. I do the opposite in terms of bluffing, which is still bluffing. But a lot of times, like I can think back to lots of them where I'll draw something up and I'll have two turns planned ahead. I can like see the finish line. Like I've won the game already. And I'll draw up to something and I'll kind of sigh. I don't do it overly dramatically, but I'll kind of sigh and say, not what I wanted, not what I needed. And then, move on and do some kind of underwhelming turn. And I feel like stuff like that it's definitely bluffing, just kind of in the opposite direction where like it puts your opponent at ease and they get sloppy. They think, all right, I've got this one. I don't need to be so tactful. Let me not worry about getting this key right now. Let me switch to a different house and just, fill up the board a little bit and, whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. Like he's not doing too well. I find myself doing that a fair amount. But what you said really is interesting. And I don't know. I'm trying to tie it into like the fact that these cards are quote unquote common, but from a having them appear in decks perspective, every time I open decks, two of the houses I really enjoy are Shadows and Logos. So when I pull up a deck with Logos, I see if it has library access. If I pull up a deck with Shadows, I see if it has bait and switch. If it doesn't, for now, and I'm sure it's going to change because I'm just really now kind of starting to get into like what I want in a deck and things like that. I'm starting to like make lists of like these are combos I want in a deck. If it doesn't have those, I kind of put it aside. And then I look at it later. But my point was, have all these decks. I bought another box. I've got 40 decks right now, and for it being a common card, it cards like that are still not super common. With the way the deck's made up, 12 of each house, they're surprisingly uncommon, for lack of a better word. And even then, with them being common, uncommon, whatever they actually are, you have to have a deck that works with it. Like it would be scary and sealed because you don't know what you get. But well, I guess I don't know which direction it would go with sealed versus Archon there. But it's your deck's only as good as the other cards in it. So your bait and switch is only as valuable as like every other card in it, in that deck. So even just having Shadows is not really an indication of bait and switch being present. In a perfect world it probably would be for them, but it's those particular cards are surprisingly uncommon, if that makes any sense. I know that was a big weird rambly tangent, but it
No,
made sense in my head.
it does make sense. And I I disagree with you on sealed format in that way, because in sealed you have to expect they have the worst possible card at every single moment. Like, and it's something you got to think of. Be like, what houses do they have? Okay, well now I know I only have to count in 3/7 of the game, but you have to expect on which is the worst card that they could have at any given moment, and try and play around that card. And I don't think that that's a skill specifically needed in Archon, because you know exactly. You take a look at their deck, you get 2 minutes, you can look at the cards, and you can pick out the threats, or at least know what the threats might look like. In Sealed, it's so much more of a guessing game because of that. And even though, yeah, bait and switch is a common, it's not going to be in every single deck. It's more likely to be in every single deck, but it's not every single deck. Same with Arise, Gateway to Dees. What are some other really swingy ones? What's the Logos one that whenever you reap, you steal instead? Interdimensional something or other?
Interdimensional graft is if your opponent forges a key, next turn you get all of the leftover amber that they have. The one that you're thinking of is Dimensional Door.
Yeah. Like I think Dimensional Door is uncommon though, so it's kind of bad for my example. But like those kind of cards, like what is the worst card that they can play, and what is your plan if they do play the worst card that they can play? And I think that's definitely a skill that Sealed requires a lot more than Archon. And it's not bad, it's not good. It's just the different formats and how you want to play the game. I definitely see Sealed as a more casual format if you don't dive super hard into the thoughts. Like, I mean, I'm diving really hard into I'm playing competitive Sealed and I'm going to want to win every single match when I say this. I don't go into every single match and be like the same exact way. I mean, if I'm like top table at a tournament, I will be playing more with that mindset. If I'm there for fun or, at a bottom table where I'm kind of already out of the running for stuff, the mindset completely changes and I'm just like, I'm going to play cards. I'm going to see what you play. Let's have a good time.
This is a great example of how profoundly different the game is, Sealed versus Archon. Archon, I tend to assume, unless I saw the person open the deck in front of me and sleeve it up and say, I'm going to give this a go right now, which I have had a couple times and I've done a couple of times, I generally assume that a person has played with the deck before or has spent some time figuring out the deck, and therefore every move they make is being made with the intention of enacting some kind of master plan. Sometimes that's, archiving strategy early on. Sometimes it's board control strategy early on. Sometimes it's just cycling the deck strategy early on. Whereas, judging by the Sealed games that I've played on the Crucible, most people just like jump in and say, all right, well, we'll play it as it lays, which is a fun way to play Keyforge. And certainly I feel in many ways like, although it is a test of your knowledge of the game and your ability to adapt to unusual situations that you haven't found yourself in before, it really does change my mindset of what my opponent is doing and my ability to recognize what my opponent is doing. If I know they know their own deck, or I suspect that they know their own deck pretty well, everything seems like it's moving towards something, to get them the win as fast as possible. As has been often repeated, that's the nature of Keyforge. Like, it's a race to the end. Whereas, Sealed, everybody's kind of just figuring out as they go along to a certain degree.
I can see with Sealed that they're trying to figure it out. I mean, you get to look at your own deck, which is nice, and it allows more of an access to that. But I'm not too sure about if you can go into a Sealed game in that regard where every single card that you're looking for has all the answers. And I definitely think that it's a more casual format in its principle, but can be really competitive because of the choices and strategies and how many cards there are in the game.
Nick, when you play Sealed, do you look at the deck list and go, okay, here's what I'm looking for, and here's what my general overall strategy is? Or are you more like on my side of just like, all right, let's deal out a hand and see what happens?
It depends. So I haven't played real sealed in person yet. I've played kind of like a simulated sealed in person where just, going to a Monday night casual and I've got some decks that I, have been waiting to crack open and I'll see, the person across from me sleeving up a deck. So I'll pull one out, to keep it fair. Um, so I've done something like that. And in the context of like a really casual kind of thing, sometimes on Crucible I'll do this. I just won't bother. Like my win loss is not, there is no win loss on, Crucible for sealed. It doesn't matter at all. I'm not tracking it personally or anything. So sometimes I'll just screw around. And it would depend more on the stakes. Even if it's just like personal stakes where, it's somebody that there's a fellow that comes to my local game store, every tournament, and he kind of just wipes the floor. He's really great. So if I were playing him in sealed, there'd be a little more pressure on me to, see what I have and see what I should look out for and stuff like that. But no, I think a lot of the point for me of sealed, and it's just for me, it's not, not the point. I'm not saying that's the point of sealed. It's just that kind of complete uncertainty. And it's almost more fun to just go in totally blind. And it's just, it's like the cards are just like popping out of thin air, with just no rhyme or reason to it. And it's a distinctly different play style. And it can be really fun if you can get your opponent to do the same thing. It would definitely not be fun if they've looked at their deck list and you haven't looked at yours. I mean, it could be if you really like a challenge, but there's something really cool and different about, it's like taking a unique deck concept and then like making it even more uncertain. It's already pretty uncertain as it is in terms of buying it and learning it, and you can't assemble your own deck. But it just like, it almost, I'm trying to think of something to compare it to and I'm struggling. Just like almost like a video game style of just like complete uncertainty, just poofing out of thin air, no clue what's like just no clue what's going on, what's next. Speaking of the Crucible, I have a topic idea. And before I get into that topic, I want to address something. I'm not going to touch on it for long. I'm not going to give anyone the satisfaction. But if anyone has any concerns about me being overly negative, one, you're probably right. I'm really negative. But I'll say I do it for two reasons. One, because I've kind of learned like in my personal life that like having that like critical thinking has helped me do better in like literally every aspect of my life. Like I run a couple different businesses. I do nerdy stuff like that. And the reason those businesses exist is because I was critical of an existing service or an existing marketplace and saw that I could improve on it. And it's like, it's not just, I'm just not just, Ebenezer Scrooge. I'm not just a mean guy and just mad at the world. It's like I'm productively negative. And in the, that's one side of it, but specifically in the context of Keyforge, one, I don't want to be really a yes man podcast. I want to be, like an unbiased Keyforge podcast. And like, communities go down weird paths when everyone's kind of just a yes man and is too afraid to kind of challenge anything or combat anything. And if nobody's challenging or combating anything, then that's how games can kind of go the wrong way. An overwhelming community might say like, hey, we don't like this or that. But if nobody's speaking up and complaining about it, and, especially like, here I'm going to make myself sound bigger than I am. But like if the big outlets that cover a game or an event or whatever it actually is, apply it to any scenario, then, if they're not addressing things and, vocalizing kind of negative thoughts or opinions, then nothing ever changes. So I really don't want to just be this, and that's not saying I'm like purposely negative, but if I have a negative thought, and if any of the guys have negative thoughts, I really encourage it being like brought up and discussed as opposed to just this kind of, because if everybody's agreeing with each other and there's never any real discussion, it's just kind of like thinking thoughts out loud. Everyone nods their head yes and moves on to the next one. Like I don't feel like that's a fun podcast to listen to. It's possible that I might harp too much on things, but anything that I am negative about, like I remember the big one was like the chain thing. I was real kind of nasty about that. I really stand by most everything I said. Like my opinions didn't change, and I share a lot of the same opinions with other people on that, I think. And it was something that kind of deserved to be talked about. So I'm not pretending like I have any voice in the community or that anyone's going to listen to me. That's fine. But I don't want to go down the path of just like kind of mindlessly agreeing with each other and not ever challenging anything, and just, everything's great, everything's butterflies and roses, because, it's the real world and people have varying opinions. So I apologize if I do sound, if it's annoying to listen to somebody be so negative, especially if you disagree. There's nothing worse than listening to a podcast and having somebody say something you disagree with, and especially like with me harping on about it for 10 minutes, and just like having to sit there and grit your teeth and not listening. I do apologize for that, but try to understand it comes from a place of, it does come from a place of positivity. It's like I'm a little grouchy now, so that hopefully, the game continues to be good and positive. I don't know. That's just what I want to say. That being said, the Crucible, is it good or bad?
Oh, okay. Now I get why the rambling was happening. Okay. Oof.
Okay.
No, those are two separate things. I knew I wanted to address that, but that's been on the list for a couple of weeks, and just I have some strong opinions about it, but I'm curious, and it's a big open-ended question. I guess I'll leave it open-ended because it'll get the most interesting answers. But just with that vague question, is the Crucible good or bad? What do you guys think?
Let me put it out here. I think that the Crucible is incredible. It is a terrific fan-centric aspect of the game that has helped it grow and provides everybody, no matter where they live and what access they have to Keyforge and a local Keyforge community, to play Keyforge. That is absolutely worthy of praise. It is a free service that was done out of the love and excitement for Keyforge, and nothing should ever be like, I would never cast any aspersions on the Crucible from that perspective. That said, I do feel that some perspectives about Keyforge are being shaped by the Crucible, and some of those things may be having negative impacts on some people's perceptions of the game. That's not necessarily the fault of the Crucible or the people who made it, who did it with the best of intentions and have provided us all with this amazing way to play Keyforge. One of the problems that I think that there is, though, is that allowing anybody to play any deck that they want on the Crucible has created scenarios where we have false perspectives on what's in the card pool, and it is starting to shape people's ability to enjoy the game. Some people's ability to enjoy the game. For example, I've seen a lot of people talk on the Facebook group and in other places about certain decks always being played against them on the Crucible. Some people have done the number crunching and the polls from, I guess, via the API to actually check how many of these decks there are in existence. And it turns out that it's a very small, percentage of, 4 horseman decks or double 4 horseman decks or double time traveler decks or what have you, or infinite combo Nepenthe Seed library access decks. And yet there are people who believe, because they've encountered it so many times on the Crucible, that these are major impediments to their ability to enjoy playing Keyforge. And that's something that's been shaped by the Crucible, not from face-to-face play. I'm just going to put it out there that I have only ever encountered like one 4 horseman deck in person. I've never encountered library access Nepenthe Seed, and I've never encountered double time traveler or something else to that effect in person, but I have encountered them many times just playing on the Crucible. And it's one of the things that I think that we have to be ultra mindful of right now, which is the Crucible is great for Keyforge. There could be some improvements to the way that the Crucible works that I think would shut down some of the things that may make Keyforge less fun to play on the Crucible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you summed up my thoughts exactly. I have other comments about it. They're not even complaints. They don't even go in the bad category. I wish it were mobile friendly, and it's not super friendly. And I wish it were more. I wish there were an easier way to distinguish what your opponent does during their turns. And I get, with a web-based implementation like this, from like a developer perspective, you can't really do crazy animations. You can't do anything like that. It's pretty bare bones, and it's awesome for what it is. Those aren't even really complaints; they're just comments. I want to play Keyforge in bed. Like that's my biggest what comes to mind. But I'm exactly in the same boat as you. I worry, especially knowing how many people I've talked to that like don't physically own any decks. They play exclusively on the Crucible. or Tabletop Simulator or whatever. I really worry about them, hopping into a game, especially it's made even worse, when they pick beginner, because there's that group of people that prey on the beginners and just want to, I don't know why their sense of satisfaction, or what triggers that is so screwed up. If not only do you want to like net deck and beat a normal person, but you want to go and net deck the people who have like labeled themselves as beginners, like your barometer's real screwy. But my concern are all these people that are potentially interested in the game and they're checking it out, and then they're getting net decked and just stomped into the ground, and they just walk away from those couple games that take them 45 minutes each, whatever. Maybe not, but they've all of the things that may be perceived as negative things about Keyforge, they get them all in one game, and they just think, you're like, man, that like no part of that was fun. Like this game's, this guy has a deck that I'll never get. None. I have 4 decks here. None of them are even come close to this guy's awesome deck, and they just walk away from the game forever. Like you said, I'll reiterate, that's no fault of the Crucible, like not at all. You can't fault him for that, and it's even less of his fault, because there's no way to solve that from a developer perspective. There's an API for Master Vault. You can pull decks, you can do things like that. There's no way to do authentication, which is what you need to do. You'd need them to log in with their Master Vault credentials, whatever, and verify that they own that deck. And it's just like you literally can't do that. They don't allow that, and nor will they. And the other alternatives are just as crazy. Like I've sat down and thought about it a lot, and there's like literally no solution. You can't have them have to verify every single deck they ever want to use. I was thinking maybe you could do like a win-loss thing. Like you could publicly display a win-loss for maybe the person and or the deck. And if you see somebody with a win-loss of the deck, 100 wins and 2 losses, maybe you just walk away from it. I don't know. But then that just really, it adds a whole nother element to online play that I feel like does way more harm than good and doesn't really solve the problem. It just punishes you for maybe like genuinely doing well. And it's, I don't know. I've gone on, and I've on record kind of on, both on the show and on Facebook, of complaining about net decking. I'm not a fan of it for obvious reasons. When it's done maliciously, people can test all the decks they want. They can even, test a really great deck to see what all the hype's about. It's the people that, have learned to pilot that crazy deck and are just like, it's like turning on an aimbot in Call of Duty, and they just get on the Crucible just to stomp and, like, I guess say they got a win or whatever. But I get a lot of flack for suggesting that net decking is a thing, and it's a really interesting dynamic that there's a lot of people out there, I don't know if you've seen them, that deny that net decking is a thing. And it's like it's undeniably a thing. It's, just from an objective perspective, it's happening. There's no way around it. And it's just like, it seems like all the responses to that are so wrong. It's just, the people will tell you like, well, why don't you just get better at piloting your decks? Maybe you just need to get good. And it's like, or they'll use some either like lies or like some confirmation bias to say like, I've played 1,000 Crucible games and I have never once encountered any of these whatever, so-called broken decks. And it's, and I make the argument, it's like, I'm just like playing through every conversation I've ever had about it in my head, but I'll make the response that says, and one thing I've noticed is there's a real difference, a real giant gap between my win-loss in person and the decks I encounter in person and my win-loss online. And they'll say, well, yeah, all the good people are going to be playing online. But I would make the argument, I'm just like having a conversation with myself right now. I'm not even involving anyone else.
I'm just waiting.
But
don't worry. I got a turn.
My response to that is, I would argue it's the opposite, and that on the Crucible, you've got this gigantic pool of, 500 people playing at any time, and you're bound to have way more new uncertain people than, and I don't know, I'm sure maybe somebody could do that math if it's available. It's probably not. But like, say you have 10 people to show up to your thing, and you do a sample size of 10 from the Crucible, 10 at your local game store, 10 on the Crucible, I'd be willing to bet that the people at your local game store are more serious and are coming better equipped than like, the whatever out of 10 on the Crucible that are, probably people just starting out, just figuring it out. Not all of them. There's going to be great people on there, but it just, I took this into another direction. I'll bring it back around to, is the Crucible good or bad? But I think that's the most potentially damaging aspect of the Crucible is that people are getting bad, they're walking away from games with a bad taste in their mouth, and it could be detrimental to to the game's future. And I get the solution to that, not great for the Crucible guy, but it's for FFG to release their own online implementation. And I understand all the reasons why they might not want to, the risk of potentially cannibalizing the physical sales. But in terms of just turning people onto the game in this crucial time when everyone wants to play it, like, the time is now to put that thing out there and just corner that online market, go stand up there next to Hearthstone, because it would, and just like let people explore it, and then just really shove it down their throats so that they can go play it in person, and however they do the physical versus digital implementation, I don't even care at this point. But I would like to see that happen, not just for my own selfish reasons, so I can play Keyforge in bed and avoid net decking also, but so it doesn't potentially harm the game itself and the community surrounding it.
The Crucible is great. I'm going to preface everything that I say this with the Crucible is great. It is an absolutely fantastic, free, fan-made online service. I have thanked the developer in person, not in person, but on the Crucible by itself on an opening day. And it is absolutely a fantastic thing. It is, however, a tool to play Keyforge. And the tool, physically, is great. It does all the automations, it is able to play the game well, it's able to make things easier for you. And I'm going to take this in a really weird turn, because I'm not going to say it's good or bad in any way that you're thinking about, because we talked about automation, and the Crucible is actually bad for the game because of automation. Everything else of the game, it's a tool. It's really good. The net decking problem, it's the people that you play with. People are going to net deck. I think you need to be able to net deck to be able to play combos and learn about them if you want to get good at the game. That part's okay. Bad people are going to be bad and go in the beginner channel with some absolutely amazing deck and just, they've piloted 100,000 times, and they're going to do that. They're going to use the tool not for good, not for bad. They're going to use the tool specifically for how they want it, and that's absolutely fine. I honestly think that the only bad thing is the automation, because you don't see the rules and how they interact correctly. And somebody who's going to play online the entire time, they will have a good general knowledge of the game. They'll have a great knowledge of the decks that they're piloting because they're playing all the time on there. But they might miss some of these little interactions that an automated game won't let you see in the background. And it's kind of a weird predicament to say that that's the negative of the Crucible, because I am almost wholeheartedly agreeing with Alex in this. The Crucible is an absolutely fantastic time. It's a great tool. Thank you so much to the people who make sure that this runs. Thank you to the people who have thrown a bit of PayPal money to get some better servers, because I do hear a lot of complaints about the servers being, but nah, it's a free thing. I'm okay with it. If a server goes down on a game, it's a free. I lost maybe 5 minutes. I'm fine. Whatever. But the automation of the game, able to track the damage on its own, able to make things automatically purge and taken out of the game, it makes in-person play sloppy. And I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, disagree with me on this, but it's definitely one of those things that being there in person and having to physically move the pieces onto the card helps instill it in your brain. It's almost like a pneumatic device. Having the interactions happen, you having to piece them one at a time, instead of it being like this snap and everything has happened, it helps reinforce a lot of the more weirder mechanics.
I would challenge your kind of view on that, your thought process, in that I would bet the Crucible's playing no real role in in-person play in a negative way, if at all, because I would guess there's a portion of people out there who play physical Keyforge and want to play physical Keyforge, but there's no one to play with right now, so they get on the Crucible, like me. And then there's people who want to play Keyforge, don't ever want to play in person, so they play on the Crucible, and they don't ever have to learn the the kind of in-person etiquette of playing. Um, and I think it's mostly broken up between them. And at worst, it acts as a learning tool, because if you think about it, without the Crucible, there's still going to be the same people that want to play in person, but they're going to have literally no way to do it, and they're going to come with even less knowledge than they would had they played on the Crucible. That's just my opinion, but I would guess that's more accurate.
I'm going to throw it out here that there's an interesting idea that just occurred to me from what you said, Stephen, and also from what you said, Nick, which is you get a very good basic understanding of Keyforge from playing on the Crucible, but those finer details around language are what's going to be lost. I think that's partly what you were saying. Would you say that's a fair assessment of your position, Stephen?
Yeah, it definitely would be. There are a few more pieces and parts to it in my side. The language of cards will be lost. Sometimes, like I had somebody who I used a card that had poison on it. I believe it was the asp in Shadows, and the person didn't understand why the card immediately died, and I had to explain it to him a couple times, like in the interaction of just poison. And I think it's because that one specifically doesn't have poison on there. Go ahead and finish your point while I looked it up. It may not be the asp that I'm thinking of.
I guess when we start to get into real deep rules questions that have required clarification from FFG, a huge number of them are about the specificity of language, the difference between must and may, the difference between, simultaneous effects and how they play out depending on the way cards are worded, the fact that the order of effects is, important in Keyforge because, as we all know, you always do as much as possible specified on the card, which of course changes things within the game if only part of a card is doable on a turn based on board state or state of play. So having all of that be automated doesn't necessarily instill within the player the understanding of what that language means and how it works. So that's an excellent point, Stephen, I think. And it's not one that I had considered previous to you, but yeah, especially too, when I'm looking at, some of these very complicated rules questions that have come up about very specific situations. And the clarification comes around from, well, it's the difference between this wording versus this wording. And those can be real, mind melters and brain twisters when you start to try and figure them out, and not having had those interactions, in person while you're trying to play the game, I think perhaps could lead to some problems with general sloppy play. So I think that's a very good point.
Yeah. And again, like I said, I do agree with you that the Crucible is absolutely fantastic, except for that one minor nuance, like weird thing that I have about it. And I was also wrong. I looked it up. It's not Mantis app that I was thinking of. It's the Moon Cursor. Mantis app has the words skirmish and elusive, but it also has the text with them. Moon Cursor has just not skirmish and elusive, skirmish poison. And Moon Cursor just has skirmish, comma, poison, fight, steal one. It doesn't have the things cleared out. So that's why the words were being lost on, is because they just weren't on the card itself. But I wanted to make sure I actually got the right card.
Hey, Nick, have you ever had like a rules conversation with somebody in the chat bar on the Crucible?
I don't think so. I've asked a couple times. I'll ask, how did that just happen? Things that I can't, no matter how far back I read in the chat, I can't figure out, because there's some things, and it sucks because I can't think of an example right now, but I notice it obviously every time it pops up. There's some things the Crucible doesn't mention in the log, and I don't know exactly what it is. It's like when a card, plays in, I wish I could remember, but I know and there's somebody out there that's going to say, yeah, I've noticed that too. There's a certain mechanic that the Crucible does not, write out when it happens. But so there, to answer your question, yeah, there's a couple times where I'll personally ask you, like, how did that work? And they'll explain it to me. But nobody's really challenged anything that's happened yet. I don't have a lot of the weird things that people encounter on the Crucible. I don't have anyone, maybe once a week I'll have somebody just concede. No, maybe more than that. Just concede mid-game or early in the game. And a lot of times I think it's because, and this is just me being kind of negative again and assuming the worst, but I think it's because they're playing a net deck and they're not set up for their combo at the beginning of the game. So they just fold and walk away. I think that's usually what happens because I don't have like an overwhelming lead on when that happens. I also don't have anyone, telling me to F off in chat. Like I see it a lot of times people post silly screenshots and I've been lucky enough to avoid a lot of that stuff.
I live on that salt. Like if somebody does that to me in a game, or like I just crush them and they're like BG and then just automatically leaves. I'm like, yeah, this is great.
I had my first salty experience yesterday, and I feel like it was justified, and I kept it all inside. I didn't let nobody ever knew that I was salty, but I was playing someone who I don't know. I guess the board state doesn't really matter. I had logo something something. He had dis something something. And I was setting myself up to play my library access. So anyone who plays library access knows that you try to assemble a hand of logos just to give yourself the best oomph you can. At least 3, preferably 4 or more. So I think I had 4. I had library access, and then the phase shift, a bunch of other crap, a bunch of other logos crap. And he played he was control of the week, and he said that it's control of the week. You have to pick one, or you can't.
Control of the week
one.
is you have to pick it.
Okay.
Restingence is the one
He
that
had
you
me
cannot pick.
Okay, well, control of the week. He had me pick, one of my other ones, Brobnar or something like that. So I played my one Brobnar card and drew into something else, whatever. And then he played Restringuntus, and he picked logos. I was like, oh, that sucks. Okay. So I don't think I had anything on the board. I had one artifact down, an artifact that let me, it was a Sanctum artifact. I could reap it and I could return one of their artifacts to their hand. Didn't help me, whatever. So, first turn I picked, I think Brobnar. I played a Brobnar action that did nothing. And then I drew a logos card. And then he picked his turn, whatever. And he had played Restringuntus and picked logos. So I could not pick logos. So I played my Brobnar card, whatever, and a turn drew into logos. Then the next turn I played Sanctum. I played a Sanctum action that didn't do anything. And I drew into a logos card. And it was like, the 4th, 5th turn in the game, nobody had any amber, no one had any keys, nothing. And the game was over. Like I had a handful of 6 logos cards. I had one artifact on the field that didn't do anything. It removed his discard, and his artifact was you may use a creature this turn or something like that. It was useless. It didn't matter. And the game was over, and I was so fucking mad. Not that I lost, because I was playing a new deck that I didn't really care about. I'm just like going through all these new decks, charting their win loss. But I was upset at that I was locked out, and not just locked out, but I was locked out so early in the game. And that seemed kind of like a broken scenario that was unlikely, but more possible than the people in the thread. I posted a screenshot of it in the thread, just kind of a silly one, just like totally locked out. I didn't really assign anything to it. I just let people go wild with the conversation, and the majority of the people were like, "Yeah, that's the point of the game. Like, get better, whatever. You shouldn't have let that happen." Like, kind of like blaming me, which seems strange. But anyway, my whole point in all this was I was very salty about it. He asked at one point, like, "Do you only have logos?" And I said, "Yep." And he didn't say anything else. And he ran through, the rest of the game, just turn after turn. And then I, at the end of the game, I had typed up a response to a question I was waiting for him to ask. I was waiting for him to say GG. And I had it like ready to hit enter. It was going to say, was it? And that was the most salty I was willing to get with it. Cause I was just mad at I wasn't mad that I lost. I was just mad at the way I lost. And I was really hoping that guy wasn't going to puff his chest up and just be like, oh yes, good win on my part. Cause it just seemed really cheap, but that was the closest I've gotten to being salty. And I didn't let it get out.
Let me ask you guys this. From an etiquette perspective, we all know that when you load into the server on the Crucible, you have the opportunity to click on your opponent's deck and have a look at what they have in it. Do you think it is bad form to, if you see that it looks like something that has a lot of OP nature in it, like it's a double horseman or it's a double time traveler, or it has that Restringuntus combo in it, or Nepenthe Seed library access? Do you think it is bad form to quit at that point before the game has started?
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'll expand on it in kind of with a different question or a more broad question that's not super specific. I don't think I haven't ever conceded a game that early. I think, probably a couple times, very end of the game, like I know there's no way, it's because I learned it in Hearthstone, and it's like it's frowned upon for whatever reason in Keyforge, which is weird because it's not frowned upon in person. If you know you're going to lose, your opponent says, that's game, and then they shake. It's for whatever reason, it's just been like you're not supposed to ever concede on the Crucible, which is strange, especially with how long the games are. I've done it a couple times, but more often than I concede, I will recognize that I'm going to lose pretty immediately. And it goes back to the net decking discussion that I'm not going to rehash and keep talking about. Sorry that I keep doing it, but I people say net decking's not a thing, whatever. It's like if you play on Crucible enough, you get really good at recognizing like a surprisingly good deck or a deck that somebody brought because it's broken. First turn they do this, that, and the other, and it just becomes so overwhelmingly obvious that they found the most broken deck they can that generates a 8 amber in their second turn and this and that. And I don't leave when that happens, but I recognize it and it bums me out. And it's like, it bums me out because like I'm going to waste my time. I'm going to get a loss. And when I'm playing on Crucible, pretty exclusively, I don't play my good decks on Crucible, which is my own fault and my own problem. If I were playing my best deck that wins like almost all the time, I probably wouldn't mind net deckers and I probably wouldn't even recognize them. But when I'm playing a deck that I can look at the list, I can tell it's good, and it like really stomped its first couple of games, and then it just gets slammed. It's frustrating because I'm taking this spreadsheet. I've got 40 decks here. I'm playing every one of them to figure out what's good and what's bad. What I can get rid of, so I can narrow it down to 10 good decks, so I can play the different formats that require me to bring multiple and stuff like that. But I've got these decks that have 0 wins, 0 losses, and I'm playing the first game with them. If I lose that match, assuming that I'm losing to a net decker, which isn't always the case, but assuming I lose to that, that's I've got a 0% win ratio. And then when if I win one, it's at 50%. But say it's just like, the bigger the pool is, the more I play, the less damaging that loss is. But in the context of me having 40 decks, a Keyforge game taking 30 minutes, 40 minutes each, it's hard to play each of them. And to lose like that when it's, I don't know, that loss, like even though I struggle, and I think there's only been one that I've known it was like a double horseman or something. I left that off my sheet. I was like, this is the first game I play with this deck. I'm not counting it as a loss. That's BS. But literally every other time, I just kind of I have the same battle in my head. Like, do I add this? No. Yeah, I better. And then I add it, and it's fine. But like, it's really really sucky. It's really tricky when you're testing all these decks and you're playing them like almost not for fun, just to get over the hurdle of seeing what's good and bad, so then you can have fun, and you're just getting screwed along the way. And I realize right now that doesn't have anything to do with the question you asked, so I apologize. I could bring it back to it, but I don't even have an answer that like ties into that. It's like, I don't even avoid that by conceding, because one of the reasons I don't concede, I'll try to bring it back around. One of the reasons I don't concede is because Keyforge is so wacky in that your opponent can have 2 keys and you can have none and you can still win. Games turn around really fast. It's kind of like Mario Kart. We talked about this before. Mario Kart, where your position until that very last round, or very last circle around the track, is irrelevant. It's kind of the last home stretch where like real wild shit happens, and it's your your being in second place is not an indication of you winning or losing that game. So I don't concede for that reason, but I recognize times when I would want to concede, and it bums me out for a number of reasons. But no, I try to be a good sport about it and play it out.
Steven, let me make a guess around what your perspective on this might be, just to see if I understand like your gameplay. We've had a lot of conversations here about Keyforge and about gameplay. I think I know a little bit about the way that you approach the game. I see you as the kind of gamesman who, even if you load into a game and know for a fact that your opponent has brought like TNT to a gunfight, you still want to go up against him to see if you, through your own skill and your ability to pilot your deck that you have chosen, you can take out King Kong. Is that the case?
Man, I hate when you're right, but you're 100% right. I was about to say that I beat a double horseman net deck the other day with one of my random crazy decks. I have a deck that's I have actually pulled out while you were talking because I was going to bring it up anyway. It just got some crazy, like, not super insane cards, but it's got 2 Lost in the Woods. It's got a key charge. It's got Witch of the Eye to bring a couple things back, 2 Silver Tooths, a bait and switch, 4 Ghostly Hands, which is just 8 amber on free cards. It's Brobnar Shadows and Untamed. And I definitely think that my opponent misplayed because they didn't really do anything except put down 6, 7, 8 horsemen and just call Sanctum for a while. And they didn't progress the board state. They were just gaining the amber. And I was just lost in the woods. Please send the horsemen back to your hand. Not Death. Death can stay on the field. He doesn't do anything. But it was 2-3 on keys. I'm not going to say like, oh, I won this wholeheartedly. Haha. No, it was definitely a struggle. But I just ran upon somebody with a crazy double horseman deck, and I'm like, all right, let's do it. What's going to happen? Worst thing that's going to happen? I'll lose. Okay, cool. Best thing that's going to happen? I'm going to see how this deck plays, and I'll still lose. And, I eked out a win. I'm okay with that. Like I said, I can't say that it was through 100% my skill because I very much feel that they tunnel visioned on, I have horsemen, reap, 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 reap. But yeah, I think they were actually expecting to concede, and I don't know if that's a game plan right now. Now that you guys brought this up, that might be a legitimate game plan because I do know for a fact that wins and losses are tracked on Crucible on the back end. They've said they're never going to make them public unless everyone like has an outpouring for it. But the win-loss concede ratio is being tracked on the back end. It's there for them to be able to make adjustments to the Crucible itself. It's not there for any like, we're going to look at your win record and, be like, this guy's the best or this guy's the worst. They're not going to do anything with that. It's just to make sure and see how things are averaging out. But
I don't care about my win-loss on Crucible because I test so many different decks, and I play, like I explained earlier, I play kind of haphazardly, whatever. But what I would really, really, really love is for either just leave it up to the player and make their opponent's concede number public, or really go super hard, which on terms of their back end and pairings and stuff like that, and like find ways to like categorize people like they did on Xbox Live back in the day. Like if you were a nice player or a mean player, if you were foul mouthed and shitty all the time, then you got bumped into like, I forget what they were called on Xbox Live, like the Underground, something like that. You like only got paired with people that were all just as shitty as you. It'd be nice if they paired people who conceded all the time with other people that concede all the time.
And that is some Jean-Paul Sartre, hell is other people, no exit shit.
Yeah,
right there.
I'm not a fan of that because I concede all the time, but that's because I like you said, like I know I've lost. There's nothing I can do. Like 2 turns out, like I'll hit the concede button. But again, I'm used to games where knowing when you're defeated is a just as good a skill as any other skill in the game. And then I've been in card games where, like, bringing it right back to Netrunner, your last turn, your opponent's going to win. You know it. And it's very telegraphed in that game. You make one last run. you make one less ditch effort to look at the top card of their deck or a single card in their hand to try and pull that grasp of victory. Keyforge doesn't really have that grasp of victory kind of mechanic. It's why a lot of, at least in my meta, I've got about 3 or 4 Netrunner players, so I used to play with all the time. I have like 2 or 3 Keyforge decks, and they show up once in a blue moon. It doesn't have that explosive finish for them. But that's not, again, it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a different thing about this game. You know when you lost. You know you can see the cards in hand. You can see they've got 8 amber. I can capture 1 amber. I can steal an amber, but that still leaves them at 6. There's nothing I can do. GG. Have a good game. Hit the concede button. Don't be a jerk about it. Type GG before you concede. So it's a amicable thing. But yeah, I don't think the concede number should be public. And I also don't think the disconnect number should be public until they have like a rock solid server. When the server becomes rock solid and some of the things that have been plaguing Crucible's back end start to, get fixed and stuff like that. Like, I definitely think that then the disconnect number should be shown. And I think that's a better way of showing that. But again, this is me feeling entitled and asking for things I don't deserve, because this is a free online thing made by fans that fans are loving, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Okay. Speaking of good decks and bad decks, I have one more topic I wanted to discuss, and it's kind of a tricky one. When do you personally decide if a deck is good or bad? Not necessarily in like sealed, whatever, but just like you went out and bought a deck, you're sitting down with it to play it, to get a feel for it, see if it'll replace your number one. Like how do you decide that, and how quickly do you give up on it? Do you attach a number to it? Is there you have some sort of system? Are you especially generous in waiting for a deck to for you to learn a deck that may say I guess I'll give my example and I'll let you guys answer. I'll play a deck 5 times on my little spreadsheet, and from there on I'll decide, do I want to keep playing it? Do I just want to get rid of it? What do I do from there? And most of the time I can decide right from there. There's usually an overwhelming response, either just like won overwhelmingly or lost overwhelmingly, give or take 1. But there's times where I'll see, I have a note section on it. I'll do, I have this big spreadsheet. It's got, names, games played, win loss percentage. Then I do, the ADHD, whatever. Then I have, creatures, upgrades, artifacts, all that stuff. And then I have a notes section. And a lot of times I'll see a deck that, like, I have one in there right now. I think I've played, let me pull it up. I've played 4 games with it. It's 1-1 and it's lost 3. But the notes are, on it says, like lots of potential ? Potentially, I'll add a new note every time I play it. Like lots of potential, really great deck, really great potential. These combos, but it's lost overwhelmingly. It's lost. It's won 25% of the time. It's lost 75% of the time. But I haven't given up on it yet, because I think it's a deck that, this one in particular, like I won't be able to stand on just the cards in it. It'll rely on me like piloting it as best as possible. But I've broken my own rule of 5 wins losses, and I'm going to keep playing it until I'm for sure, because I think the deck still has potential. Do you guys have any sort of like system, or do you just play it by ear?
I do not think that there is a bad deck in this entire game.
Whoa!
I know. I'm gonna go out and go crazy, and I've called decks bad on the show before. Exactly. Last time, I literally called the deck bad and then sold it because somebody in the comments wanted it. Thank you, by the way, for buying that deck. I hate it. I hate the deck. I don't think that there is a legitimately bad deck, and there's 2 reasons for it. The first is a very, very simple reason. Everyone has their own play style of what they enjoy. And it's the same thing in Magic. It's the same thing in Hearthstone. You pick a class and you love playing the Hunter because they can do aggro. You like playing Magic because blue is all about control and you're able to keep the field down. I think that the decks in Keyforge are built in such a way, even though they are random by chance, that there will be a deck that I will absolutely hate. I will pick it up and I will play it like 2, 3, 4 times, because I'm going to give every deck a fair shake. I'm going to try it, and I cannot play it. There's somebody in my meta who has a very different description of what decks they enjoy. They absolutely hate Logos. They absolutely hate Mars. I get all their Mars Logos decks. They get a lot of my Brobnar decks because I'm not a very good Brobnar player. And it works out for us. And a deck that I feel is absolute garbage, that will never win a game in my hands except for some utterly crazy luck or me getting the exact right cards at the exact right time, that's a bad deck to me. And the second opinion that I have of this, and it is a completely different tangent, is that I have this very strong feeling that the 90% of the decks in Keyforge at base, like in each deck in its own vacuum, 90% of the decks in this game are around the standard bell curve of average. There'll be some that are going to be above average. There'll be some that are going to be below average. I think 5% of the decks are going to be absolutely crazy, and 5% of the decks are going to be actual terrible, like synergies that don't work with each other or actively harm you. I think that the grand majority of the cards are around a 90% of the cards are within the standard deviation of a bell curve. Again, in a vacuum, without having player bias or player personality involving the deck or piloting skill. And again, this is a theory. I have no actual way of testing that. This is just how I strongly believe. However, there is one saving grace for that 50, or for the 5% of decks that are the absolute worst of the worst, complete and utter garbage. And I have one of these coming up in a month. It's called Reversal. I think that format is what saves bad decks, because in that, every deck is a great deck as long as it's terrible.
Interesting that you would bring this up, Nick, because I bought a deck this week that I cannot win a game with. And now I'm obsessed with trying to win a game with it. Logos Mars Shadows. It's called Boss H Peak Toes, which is, once again, a weird name in the classic Keyforge style. But there's nothing on paper about this deck that is bad. It looks pretty average. It's got some interesting stuff in it. It's got like 2 psychic networks, which should, with the right layout of creatures, really be advantageous. It's got a couple of shadow selves in there, which should really help buff up your shadows. But for some reason, every time I play with it, I just get stomped. I played a game with it before we started recording today to see if I could get it to work, and I lost the game with literally no Keyforge, no Amber, 0.
What's the name of that deck again?
Boss H Peak Toes. So the possibilities here are twofold, or threefold, I guess. One, I'm terrible at Keyforge. I would not discount that as being the reason why I can't squeak out a win with this deck. 2, I've played against an unusually good spread of decks with this particular deck, and that's the reason that I can't squeak out a win. Or 3, there's just no synergy in it. There's no efficiency in it. And that's why, even though it has good cards, there's no possibility to win against even a relatively competently piloted competitive deck, or slightly above average or even average deck. And I'm kind of in love with the idea of trying to figure out which of those 3 it is, or what combination of those 3 it is. So I am giving Boss H Peak Toes all the time in the world. I'm playing it every single day. I've probably got it in like 10 games with it in like the 3 or 4 days since that I bought it, just because I really want to understand what it is about this deck, which on paper looks totally fine, that makes it not able for me to win a game with. So I'm giving it lots of time. And I guess the answer to your question, Nick, is if there's some intriguing aspect of a bad deck or a non-competitive deck, it makes me want to play it more, because I just want to see what I can do with it. And when I win a game with this deck or with one of my other bad decks, it is the best feeling in the entire world, because you are able to make something out of nothing. There's an expression in pro wrestling, which is you make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And I want to do that with decks. I think that that's a fun aspect of Keyforge.
I'm looking at your deck right now. I want your deck. This is my playstyle. I mean, again, we were talking about how Shadows needs a bait and switch. There's no bait and switch in this deck, but yeah, I'm not seeing how you lose. I'm personally not seeing how you lose with this deck, and I'm gonna.
Well, I'm just not very good at
I
Keyforge,
mean,
Stephen. Like, to keep that in mind.
I'm gonna do the Cardinal Sin apparently and net deck this. I'm gonna put this on my Crucible. I'm gonna try this out because this thing looks great. Like, and I get what you're saying that it looks good on paper, and you agree with me on that. But I want to see. I want to see where your problem is with this deck, because like I look at this deck and I'm like grinning at the teeth. I'm like ready to go into a Crucible game while we record while I play this thing. Like this deck seems to me absolutely up my alley, absolutely fantastic. I know exactly how I want to pilot it because these are the house factions I'm real good at, so I know what those cards do and how they interact with each other. And again, I mean, if you do the exact same thing and you send me something that's like Brobnar Dis, it's something that I'm not super familiar with, like I think I would have like with an equal amount of the cards, like in that same idea, I think I would have a completely opposite reaction to it. You're like, here's this terrible deck that's Brob, Dees, and something in there. Let's say Untamed, even though I love Untamed. I would look at the deck and be like, oh yeah, no, it's garbage. I agree with you. And I think that's a really neat facet of Keyforge in itself, is that, and again, why I'm defending my position here, I don't think there's a bad deck in this game. And if there is, there's a format where it shines and it becomes the best deck possible.
That's an interesting perspective, and one for another time, because we've run out of time here. But I would like to talk about that in detail next episode. Are there good decks? Are there bad decks? Or is it an even playing field? Because I think that's a topic on everyone's mind that we can really kind of tap into and dissect.
Why don't we open this up to the comments as well for YouTube? If you guys are on YouTube watching this, or if you're on any of your podcast listening things, check out our YouTube real fast and drop a comment. And if you guys want to comment about whether there's a good deck or a bad deck, I'll happily take your comments and read them on air and agree, disagree. I think we can all, like, as a community with this podcast, be able to dissect this question. Because if we're going back out to it next week, I'd love to see a lot more feedback and have some definite, more than just the three of us for a sample size.
Yeah, that would definitely provide some interesting perspective to bring up next episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Some parting notes, like always. Don't forget to check out thekeyforge.com. Over the past couple weeks, and carrying all the way through this year, we've got a constant stream of interesting and exciting articles that people actually seem to be pretty interested in. Give them a read, leave some comments, start some discussion. There's actually a surprising amount of people there in the comment section that are willing to, go to bat on their particular opinions in the nicest way possible. It's an interesting community kind of spawning around it on our site. If you enjoy the show and what we do at thekeyforge.com or on Library Access or anywhere and everywhere else we are, you can check out our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/thekeyforge. Any contribution really helps, especially because we run these tournaments on Tuesdays, and we give away cool physical prizes, and those cost money. So if you feel so inclined, drop $1 in our tip jar. But if not, no problem. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.